Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Centered Edge, Embodying Your Power. I'm Dr. Manju Padare, psychologist, CEO, and clarity strategist for those who lead from the centered edge, calming chaos and fierce in truth. Now, this isn't a podcast for surface fixes. It's for the one who feel too much, lead too hard, and are done abandoning themselves for the sake of performance. Here we unlearn the noise, we rewire the script, and we choose alignment over appearance. This is not therapy. This is not professional advice. Listening does not create a client relationship. What it is a space for insight, for embodied leadership, for those who are ready to lead without losing themselves. Now, let's get right into it. Okay, now, you know what I've been noticing in my work with C suite executives and top performers? Everyone's talking about burnout like it's some kind of badge of honor. I'm so burned out has become the executive equivalent of I'm so busy, a weird form of competitive suffering. But here's what I'm seeing in my practice that nobody's talking about. The executives who come to me aren't actually burnt out in the traditional sense of the word. They are not depleted from working too hard. They are exhausted from working as someone else. Let me tell you about Marcus. Now, he's a CEO. He runs a pretty big company. We're talking $1 million company. He came to me convinced that he had burnout, classic symptoms, exhausted, clinical, cynical, feeling ineffective. But when we dug deeper, something interesting emerged. Marcus wasn't tired from the work itself. He was tired from the performance of being the kind of CEO he thought he needed to be. Let me just get the door for my cat. There we go. Now, every board meeting, every town hall, every strategic session, he was showing up as this carefully constructed version of what a successful CEO should look like. And his nervous system, it was in fact in full revolt. Now, let's go behind the neuroscience of identity deception. Here's what the latest neuroscience research is telling us about identity fatigue. And this is something that I talk quite extensively about in my new book, yet to be launched. And this is where it gets really interesting for high performers like you who think you've heard everything about executive wellness. When you're constantly performing a version of yourself that isn't authentic, your brain treats it like a continuous threat response. Now, the anterior cingulate cortex, that's your brain's conflict monitor, is working overtime trying to reconcile who you are with who you're pretending to be. Recent research shows a dangerous combination, an overlap between burnout and engagement, which means you can be simultaneously exhausted and high performing. That's not traditional burnout. That's your biology refusing to fund your impersonation budget. Think about it this way: your brain has limited bandwidth for executive function. When you're using a significant portion of that bandwidth to maintain a persona, you have less available for actual leadership, strategic thinking, and innovation. It's like running background processes on your computer that you don't even realize are showing everything else down. The research on authentic leadership shows us something crucial. Employees' perception of authentic leadership serves as the strongest predictor of the job satisfaction. But here's the paradox: we are so focused on appearing like authentic leaders that we've lost touch with what authentic actually means for its individuality. So let's look at the performance trap. Let's get specific about how this shows up for top performers, because I know you're thinking, but I need to project confidence. I need to be the leader of my team. Here's the thing: there's a difference between professional presence and identity performance. Professional presence comes from a place of integrated self awareness, identity performance comes from fear. I had a client, let's call her Sarah because I think I wrote a post about her recently, and that's what I gave her. That's not her real name. Who was the chief marketing officer at a tech unicorn. Now, brilliant strategist, incredible results, respected by her peers. But she came to me because she was having what she called Sunday scaries every single week. Not just about Monday morning, but about having to put on what she called a CMO costume. Sarah had unconsciously created this hyper analytical, always on, never shows uncertainty version of herself for work. The problem, that wasn't actually her leadership style at all. Her natural approach was much more collaborative and intuitive, but somewhere along the way, she decided that wouldn't be professional enough for a tech environment. The cost, she was spending enormous amount of time of her energy, of her daily thinking, monitoring her behavior, self editing in real time, and suppressing her actual insights because they didn't fit her professional persona. Now, this is what I call the competence performance trap. You start performing competence so convincingly that you lose access to your actual competence. Imagine that. The more you perform, the more you are losing your actual competence. Here's where it gets really interesting from a physiological standpoint. Let's look at the biology of authenticity. Your nervous system has evolved over millions of years to detect incongruence. When there's a mismatch between your internal state and external presentation, your body interprets this as a survival threat. Your vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve that connects your brain to your major organs, is constantly scanning for safety. When you are in authentic expression, your vagus nerve can relax into what we call ventral vagal activation, a state of calm alertness that's optimal for leadership, creativity, and connection, be it connection with self, connection with people, connection with work. Some even call it focus. But when you are in identity performance mode, your nervous system shifts into what we call sympathetic activation, the fight or flight response. You might not feel anxious, but your body is in a subtle state of hypervigilance, constantly monitoring and adjusting your presentation. The study finds that employees experiencing high levels of stress is now up to 38%. That was in 2024. It was 33% in 2023. So 5% jump overall. Yeah, so that's a huge amount we're talking about when we're talking about from a global perspective. But what if that's not just about workload? What if it's about the cognitive load of maintaining professional personas? This is where the AI research gets fascinating. Advanced AI systems are now being developed to detect what researchers call semantic congruence decay. Essentially, when someone is saying all the right things, but there's a disconnect between their words and their authentic self. If AI can detect this incongruence, imagine how sensitive your team, your family, and your own nervous system are up for it. Now, let's look at the identity audit that you can do. This is where we get a little bit practical. If you're recognizing yourself in this, the first step is what I call an identity audit. This isn't about changing who you are, it's about identifying where you're bleeding energy through performance. Here are the key questions that I usually ask my clients. First, we go into the energy maps. In which situation do you feel most energized and natural? When do you find yourself putting on a mask or shifting into a performance mode? What aspects of your role feel most aligned with who you are actually? This will, in fact, give you your where is it your energy is most spent on, and it will give you where what takes away energy from you, what gives you energy. Now we go into the persona detection. If someone recorded you in three different contexts, at home, in a team meeting, and presenting to the board, would they see three distinctly different people? And then we go more and more deeper into identifying your persona. Then we go into the permission audit. What aspects of your authentic self have you decided aren't professional enough? What would you do differently if you didn't need to earn permission to exist as you are? Of course, each section has many more questions to it, but the permission audit will basically allow you to tap into yourself, to allow all your systems to go into a rest mode so they are able and willing and will in fact let you be you. So it's a full bodily physiological approach that we need to take. Now, one of my clients discovered through this audit that he was suppressing his natural tendency towards strategic questioning. Imagine that. He thought good leaders should have answers, not questions. But his actual gift was asking the questions nobody else was asking. Once he gave himself permission to lead through inquiry rather than assertion, his effectiveness skyrocketed and his energy returned. Now, let's go back to the neuroscience of authentic leadership. Here's what happens neurologically when you start leading from an authentic place rather than a performed place. First, you get cognitive load reduction. When you're not constantly monitoring and adjusting your presentation, you free up enormous amounts of mental bandwidth for actual thinking. Clients constantly report that their strategic thinking improves dramatically once they stop performing. Enhanced intuition. Your intuition capacity, what neuroscientists call thin slice decision making, requires a calm nervous system to function properly. When you are in identity performance mode, you're cutting off these rapid pattern recognition abilities that are crucial for high level leadership. And we talked about a lot about this the week before when I went live on intuitive leadership. Now, improved interpersonal neurobiology. My mirror neurons, the cells in your brain that help us understand and connect with others, function optimally when we are in authentic expression. People can literally feel the difference when you're being real versus when you're performing. And then, of course, stress response regulation. Authenticity comes from knowing what's important to you and remaining true to these values in the face of external pressures. This isn't just philosophical, it's neurobiological. When your actions align with your values, your stress response systems can actually downregulate. Now, here's where we bring everything together, the integration process, moving from performance and how do you get into your actual presence. The solution isn't just to be yourself. That's quite terrible advice for someone who spent years developing professional competencies. The solution is integration. Integration means bringing your full self to your professional role that rather than creating a separate professional identity. Here's how that works in practice. Now, phase one, we will do recognition based on all the activities we've done prior. We start noticing when you shift into performance mode. What triggers it? Like, is it board meetings? Is it difficult conversations? Is it public speaking? The goal isn't to stop it immediately, just to develop awareness. Then phase two comes exploration. We begin experimenting with bringing more of your authentic self into low stake professional situations. Maybe it's using more of your natural speaking style in team meetings or bringing your actual sense of humor into appropriate moments. And then the actual integration. This is where you start to develop what I call authentic professional presence, a way of being that honors both your authentic self and your professional responsibilities. I know a CFO who discovered that her natural communication style was much more storytelling than data heavy presentations that she thought she needed to give. So when she started incorporating narrative into her financial reports, not only did her presentation become more engaging, but her team's financial literacy improved dramatically. Imagine that. So the key insight is her authentic style wasn't less professional. It was actually more effective in delivering what she needed to deliver to her team. Now, the nervous system reset. There are specific interventions that I use with clients to help reset their nervous system and break the identity performance pattern. The authenticity check in before any high stake interaction, ask yourself, How can I show up as myself in this situation while still honoring my professional role? This isn't about being unprofessional, it's about being professionally authentic. Now, the energy recovery protocol is something that we set in place for clients because identity fatigue requires different recovery than traditional burnout. Instead of just rest, you need authentic expression. This might mean having conversation where you don't need to manage your image, engaging in activities that reflect your true interest and values, and spending time with people who know and accept your authentic self. And then the value integration practice in identifying your core value and finding specific ways to express them in your professional role. If innovation is a core value, how can you bring more innovative thinking to your leadership? If connection is more important, how can you create more genuine connection in your team dynamics? Then, of course, there is the somatic awareness exercise that I talk about almost in every single time we go live. Your body knows when you're in performance mode versus authentic mode. Learn to recognize the physical sensation. Performance mode often feels tight, controlled, slightly effortful. Authentic mode feels more grounded, naturally energized, easeful. Now we've looked at yourself, let's look at the organizational impact. Here's something most leadership development programs miss. You can't solve identity fatigue individually if your organizational culture rewards performance over authenticity. Now, business leaders head into 2025 recognizing challenges in achieving goals in the face of fatigue and burnout. But what if the real challenge isn't workload management? It's creating cultures where people can bring their full selves to their work. As a leader, you have the opportunity to model authentic presence and create permission for others to do the same. This isn't about oversharing or being unprofessional, it's about being courageous, really, in ways that serve the mission. Now, some practical ways to create this culture would be vulnerability based leadership, and everyone goes, oh no. Share your learning edge, your questions, your genuine response to challenges, not your personal problems, but your professional humanity. So don't get me wrong, vulnerability is not a scary thing for leadership. Then, of course, there's value based decision making. Make decisions and communicate them in ways that reflect your actual values, not just what you think sounds good. And of course, curiosity over certainty. Model intellectual humility, ask genuine questions, admit when you don't know something. One of my clients implemented what he called Real Talk Fridays, a brief check in where members could share what was actually happening to them professionally, not just status updates. The result was that it increased innovation, better problem solving, and significantly reduced turnover. Now, let's look at the advanced practice when we move into higher and higher, more mature levels of integration. Now, the real test of integrated authenticity isn't in casual team meetings, it's in crisis situations, difficult conversations, and high pressure decisions. This is where most executives default back to their professional persona because it feels safer. But here's what I've observed: leaders who can maintain authentic presence in high stakes situations are not only more effective, they are more trusted and more resilient. The practice is this: in any challenging situation, ask yourself, what would my response be if I felt completely safe to be truthful and direct while I'm still skillful and appropriate? I worked with a CEO who was facing a hostile takeover attempt. His instinct was to get into tough CEO mode, aggressive, defensive, controlling. But when he explored what his authentic response would be, he realized his actual strength was in collaborative problem solving and transparent communication. He ended up handling the situation with a combination of firmness and openness that would not only preserve the company's independence but actually strengthen stakeholder relationship. The takeover attempt failed, but his leadership credibility, I would say, increased significantly. Now, the ripple effect of all this is quite significant. Here's what happens when leaders start operating from authentic presence rather than identity performance: it creates permission for everyone else to do the same. Your team members are also managing their own professional personas. When you model integrated authenticity, you essentially giving them permission to bring more of themselves to their work. The result is often a significant increase in innovation, engagement, and resilience. But there's also a deeper systemic impact. Work anxiety is increasing across the board, with 43% of employees saying their stress level increased in 2024 compared to 2023. 43%. What if part of this increase is due to the cumulative effect of everyone performing professional versions of themselves? When leaders begin to break this pattern, they're not just solving their own identity fatigue, they're creating more humane and more effective organizational cultures. Now, some of the challenges that you would say in the integration process. But my industry role requires a certain image. Every industry has norms, but within these norms, there's usually much more room for authenticity than we assume. The question isn't whether you can be completely different, it's whether you can be more yourself within your professional role. Some say, I lose credibility if I show uncertainty or vulnerability. Research actually shows the opposite. Leaders who acknowledge what they don't know and show appropriate vulnerability as are seen as more competent, no, not less. The key is skillful authenticity, not unfiltered expression, right? Now, some would also say this feels selfish when my team needs me to be strong. Now, identity performance actually makes you less available to serve others effectively. When you're using energy to maintain a persona, you have less energy for available for actual leadership, innovation, service, relationships. And then some even have said, I don't know who I am anymore outside of my professional role. This is very common for high achievers who've spent years developing professional competencies. The integration process naturally reconnects you with your authentic self, not who you were before your career, but who you are now, inclusive of all your growth and experience. So that's why we integrate, we do not replace. Now, how would you measure? Traditional burnout recovery is easy to measure. You feel less exhausted, more motivated, more effective. But how do you measure recovery from identity fatigue? Some of the indicators that I use to track clients are energy quality changes. You feel naturally more energized, even in challenging situations. Interpersonal shifts, people comment that you seem more present or grounded. There are more metrics, but let me just share key ones from each segment. Then we can look at decision making improvements. You make decision more quickly and with more confidence. Stress response changes. You feel less anxious before high stake interactions. I think one client described it as it's like wearing a suit that was slightly too small for years, and then he didn't realize how comfortable it was until he finally took it off. Now, there are advanced application, as I've mentioned, as we progress deeper and deeper into more mature integration. One of it would be authentic communication as a form of influence. When you communicate from a place of genuine conviction rather than performing what you think people, rather than performing what you think people want to hear, what you think people want to see, people can sense the difference between the authentic and performed communication at a subconscious level. And then, of course, value based decision making. Decision comes from an authentic value, tends to be more sustainable and generally less internal conflict, and it'll be easier for you to implement. Integrated problem solving. When you're not using cognitive resources to maintain a persona, you have more mental bandwidth available for complex problem solving and creative thinking. And of course, authentic presence in negotiations, which is very, very important from all my time in international negotiations. People who are comfortable with their authentic self tend to be more effective negotiators because they're not trying to be someone else or please everyone. So here's the invitation. What would your leadership look like if your nervous system felt completely safe to speak unfiltered, not unprofessional, unfiltered, not inappropriate, but authentic? The executives I work with who've made this shift consistently report not just feeling better, but performing better. Their teams are more engaged, their decisions are clearer, their influence is stronger. But perhaps more importantly, they've reclaimed something of themselves that many high performers lose along the way: the ability to be themselves while being effective. So the cure for identity fatigue isn't time off. It's calling time on the persona. It's recognizing that that version of professional success that requires you to perform being someone else isn't actually success. It's an elaborate form of career theater. Your authentic self isn't something you need to improve or professionalize to make more palatable. Your authentic self, skillfully expressed, is your greatest professional asset. So the question is, are you ready to stop performing competence and start expressing it? Are you willing to trade the exhausting certainty of your professional persona for the energizing uncertainty of authentic leadership? Because here's what I know from working with hundreds of high performers: the leaders who will thrive in the coming years aren't the ones who can perform leadership most convincingly. They are the ones who can be leaders most authentically. The world needs your actual leadership, not your performance of what you think leadership should look like. The only question is, what will you choose? So, thank you for being here, for listening, for having the courage to consider that maybe, just maybe, you don't need to fix yourself. Maybe you just need to find yourself again. And maybe that's the most important work you'll ever do. Thank you and have a good weekend ahead. Cheers.